An active investigation now underway. Bray was last seen leaving her Laurel workplace early Tuesday morning. Her car found hours later and miles away.
We're out here right now searching because this is where her car was. We don't have any evidence or any other indicators.
The level of violence and brutality suffered by Ms. Bray is astonishing.
She was the greatest person. She would give her shirt off her back to freeze so you wouldn't freeze. That's just the type of person she was.
She was 57 years old. She was known for her extraordinary beauty and incredible kindness. The entire town knew her as a gentle, caring woman who adored her dogs and never walked past someone else's troubles. But it all ended so brutally that when the priest opened her coffin, he turned pale, trembled, and nearly lost consciousness. How did it happen that an angel in human form deserved such a cruel end? But before we begin, please write where you are from and what time it is for you right now. Please also write if you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed, then please let us know in the comments how we can earn your subscription. We want to create the best true crime in the world for you. Let's begin. The woman in this story was named Lori Bray. She lived in the small town of Laurel, Montana, just 7,000 residents. Such places usually seem peaceful, cozy, even safe. But peace is often just an illusion. In 2019, Lori was 57. She lived alone with her two beloved dogs and was considered one of the kindest people in town. Good, quiet, always smiling, the kind of person people say has light inside them. Neighbors, colleagues, acquaintance, everyone who had even once spoken with her remembered her warmly. But as often happens, when light is too bright, it attracts darkness. And in Lori's life, that darkness eventually appeared. Lori worked at a casino. September 30th, 2019 was an ordinary day. She finished her shift, closed the establishment around midnight, and drove home. On October 1st, the woman was supposed to come to work at 8:30 in the morning, but she didn't show up. This had never happened with responsible Lori before she needed this job. Her supervisor, Katie, tried calling her, but it was useless. The woman wasn't answering her phone, so Katie drove to see what had happened. She drove around the areas near work, hoping to find Lori. Along the way on a deserted highway, she saw a car that looked like the missing woman's vehicle. From a distance, something didn't seem right to her. The car's position and location were strange. The automobile was positioned at an unusual angle. There were fields all around, and Lori usually didn't drive this route because it was in the opposite direction from her home. There were no houses or stores nearby, so Lori had no business being there. At first glance, it seemed like someone was sitting behind the wheel. Katie decided not to panic prematurely and not to disturb the car's owner. She wasn't sure this was Lori's car, so she stopped at a respectful distance and called Justin, Lori's son. Katie told him about her suspicions regarding the employee's disappearance. The young man said he hadn't received the morning call that his mother made every day. This was also strange, so he was somewhat worried. A little earlier, the young man had tried calling himself, but the phone didn't respond to either calls or messages. After this, Justin drove to his mother's house and didn't find her car near the house where it usually stood. No one answered the door. The young man looked through the windows, but saw no one inside. He encountered the woman's dogs, who were behaving restlessly. What alarmed him was that they hadn't been fed. Lori loved animals too much to simply forget about her beloved pets and leave them hungry. It seemed that his mother hadn't made it home at all. This was the only explanation for what he saw. Justin examined the area around the house but found nothing interesting. Then he used his key and went inside. There, the young man saw a made bed and his mother's belongings weren't inside. The kettle was cold. Everything looked as if she hadn't had breakfast and hadn't spent the night at home. After the inspection, Justin called his mother's supervisor, Katie, and said that Lori wasn't at home. In his opinion, his mother hadn't spent the night at her house. The young man suggested that the car Katie found could very well belong to his mother, so the vehicle should be checked. The missing woman's colleague agreed to examine the car and waited for Justin. When the young man arrived and they approached the car, they saw that no one was inside. It was a 2003 Chrysler that wasn't locked. The son recognized that this was definitely Lori's car. They opened the doors and examined the interior. Inside, they found Lori's purse, as well as her phone, which was turned on. There were many missed calls on it. Since the woman herself wasn't inside, and they found bloodstains in the car, they decided not to continue examining the vehicle, but to call the police, so as not to spoil important evidence. They were worried that something might have happened to Lori and she was in danger. So Katie and Justin dialed 911 and waited for the police to arrive. As soon as the police began examining the car, they started finding one alarming trace after another. There was the missing woman's dirty footwear, as well as her torn clothing. They found her underwear, which was torn and bloody. Everything indicated that something terrible had happened there. So the police declared Lori Bray missing and began searching for her. They assumed that the woman had been attacked and possibly was no longer alive. The entire community around Lori's home actively responded to this event. People shared posts about the woman's disappearance on social media, distributed flyers, and participated in searches for the missing woman. Everyone was worried about kind Lori. They knew well that the woman loved animals. Very much she had repeatedly taken dogs from shelters to temporarily keep at her place until they found new owners. It was clear that such a person would never abandon her two beloved pets. Moreover, this was a very quiet town where almost nothing ever happened. Any cases of attacks occurred very rarely and caused a stormy reaction from local residents. The media covered this case, trying to draw more attention to the investigation and find those who knew at least something about the events of that night, but no one came forward. This event shook the community. People worried that a cruel killer was still walking among them. Local residents who cared about what happened and who knew Lori personally created a support fund for the missing woman's family and also helped care for the dogs that were left without their owner. Lori's car was discovered on a vast open territory with endless rural lands. This area consisted of dirty dirt roads and grass-covered spaces, making the search for any traces or clues an extremely difficult task for investigators. Numerous volunteers joined the official search efforts, concerned about Lori's fate and determined to learn the truth about what happened. All search participants reached the same conclusion. The horrifying traces inside the vehicle testified to a possible tragedy that befell the 57-year-old woman, who could not have deserved this in any way. She simply had no people who could wish her harm. Lori was last seen at her workplace after the establishment where she worked closed. After this moment, no one could determine the woman's exact whereabouts. For this reason, the area around the found automobile was thoroughly searched by law enforcement officers together with volunteers. More than 60 people began this operation at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. At the same time, police established that around 1 o'clock at night, a local sheriff had come across Lori's vehicle. However, he didn't conduct a detailed examination of the car, limiting himself to checking the license plate through the database. The Chrysler wasn't listed as stolen, so the law enforcement representative simply drove on, not noticing the horrifying traces in the interior in the darkness. Additionally, law enforcement examined the woman's mobile phone but didn't discover any suspicious phone calls. Investigators requested video recordings from the casino's surveillance cameras, but couldn't find anything suspicious in these materials. The woman performed her usual daily duties, including cleaning after the work shift ended, and then calmly headed home. Investigators tried to find witnesses who were at the casino that day and might have observed something unusual. They questioned visitors they managed to identify, but they also couldn't provide useful information to the investigation. Based on surveillance camera footage, it was established that there were few clients in the establishment that day. During the last few hours before Lori Bray left, she had only a few brief conversations with visitors. These were two ordinary women in the bar area, and around 11 o'clock in the evening, A certain young man visited the casino, to whom Lori served an alcoholic drink. She checked his identification documents in accordance with her standard work duties to ensure he was of legal age. The young man remained in the establishment until late, until the missing woman pointed to the clock, making it clear that the establishment would soon stop operating and he needed to leave. However, no suspicious events occurred inside the casino after this. The young man calmly left the premises, and later Lori also left the casino. After this, investigators began studying recordings from external surveillance cameras. Lori left the casino with her personal belongings, locked the entrance doors, got into her car somewhat after midnight, but before this had a brief conversation with the same young visitor who had left the establishment before her. After the conversation, the stranger got into the passenger seat of her vehicle, and they drove away together. There was no other person in that area. There were all reasons to assume that this man became the last person who saw Lori before her disappearance, and he aroused serious suspicions among investigators. Detectives now had the task of identifying this young man. They showed surveillance footage to other casino employees, as well as regular customers of the establishment, and they recognized the young man. He turned out to be 22-year-old Diego Hernandez. Investigators decided to immediately conduct a conversation with the young man and went to his address. The investigators found him at his registered address. The young man confirmed that it was indeed him in the surveillance camera recordings. According to his explanations, Diego asked Lori to give him a ride because he had stayed at the establishment too long and had no way to get home on his own. He had arrived without his own transportation, and the woman agreed to help. She delivered the visitor directly to his house, after which she left, and Diego later went to another party to continue his entertainment. The young man didn't encounter her again. Despite the fact that Hernandez's words sounded convincing, the police were alarmed by fresh scratches on his hands and face. Investigators questioned the young man about the origin of these injuries, as the scratches resembled injuries received during a physical altercation. From the police officer's professional experience, they looked suspicious. Diego explained that even before visiting the casino, he had had a conflict and then a physical fight with one of his friends, Nick, and he had jewelry with sharp edges, which caused him to receive these injuries. Diego didn't get confused in his explanations, and investigators, no matter how hard they tried to find contradictions in his words, couldn't do it. So law enforcement left immediately after receiving satisfactory answers. However, Diego's alibi needed verification, since there were simply no other leads in the case. For this reason, investigators went to his friend Nick, with whom they allegedly had a conflict shortly before the woman's disappearance. The friend confirmed that they had indeed met a few days ago, but no physical fight had occurred between them, and Hernandez already had a damaged face. And during their last meeting the day before, Diego was very agitated and behaving inappropriately. Due to such behavior, he had to kick his friend out, pushing him out of the car. Investigators rechecked video materials from casino cameras, but the recording quality turned out to be insufficient to accurately determine the presence or absence of scratches on the suspicious visitor's face. Later, police managed to find out that before the trip to the casino, he had been at a bar. They requested surveillance camera recordings from that establishment, and they turned out to be of much better quality. On the footage from the bar, they were able to accurately establish that there were no injuries on his face. However, connecting this to Lori's disappearance wasn't enough evidence to bring specific charges. This was simply insufficient to continue the case. While investigators continued gathering information, at 7:30 that evening, a person contacted police reporting the discovery of a naked woman's body while riding an ATV through a forested area. Police officers immediately went to the indicated location. There, law enforcement was able to identify the missing person. The body lay in a ditch, covered with dirt, in a fetal position. There were numerous injuries on the body sustained from beating. It seemed that the perpetrator had used a stone or simply methodically inflicted blows to the body for a long time. Lori was located 3 kilometers from her car. There were countless abrasions on the body, with the head particularly severely damaged. And later, forensic experts discovered 2 broken ribs and signs of strangulation. Most likely, this was a sexually motivated crime. Additionally, the deceased wasn't killed at this location. Her body was brought here later, as evidenced by drag marks on her back, and there were no blood traces near the discovery site. Most likely, she was killed in her own car, where numerous bloodstains were found, or near it. Even experienced police officers were shocked by the cruelty with which the crime was committed. By the number of abrasions, bruises, and fractures, this case surpassed everything that had previously happened in this quiet town. During the investigation of the horrific discovery site, investigators found a clearly imprinted shoe print that matched a print found in the car's interior. This imprint could become key evidence in the case, and it needed to be compared with Diego Hernandez's footwear, who was already arousing suspicions among law enforcement. The autopsy showed that Lori's death resulted from strangulation. Specialists also established that the woman was brutally raped, as evidenced by numerous tissue tears. Male DNA from the perpetrator was found on the deceased's body. Investigators continued checking all information received from Hernandez. After analyzing data about the murdered woman's mobile phone location, police established that she never made it to Diego's house, despite the fact that he claimed otherwise, meaning his story was an outright lie. This further strengthened suspicions regarding Diego. Additionally, while questioning female employees of another bar that Diego visited before the casino, detectives learned that he had been harassing the establishment's staff. The young man behaved quite brazenly and unceremoniously, insisting that they give him a ride home, but all the female employees refused him, and he left. On October 4th, based on all collected evidence, a warrant was issued to search Diego's residence. There they found a pair of Nike sneakers with a sole whose imprint resembled the trace found at the crime scene. Investigators noticed that this footwear had been recently carefully washed. The sneakers were sent to the laboratory for examination. It turned out that the imprint of these sneakers was completely identical to that found in Lori's car interior, as well as near her body. Additionally, clothing similar to what Hernandez wore in the bar and casino on the day of the deceased's disappearance was found. However, the items had been carefully washed and treated with cleaning agents. The clothing was also sent for expert examination. It was expected that some bloodstains or DNA traces might have remained on it, but after such intensive processing, unfortunately, nothing could be detected. Diego was meanwhile brought in for repeated questioning, and they took a DNA sample from him to compare with the sample found on Lori's body after the rape. The young man immediately became nervous and changed his testimony. The suspect clarified that they had known each other for a long time and maintained communication. Diego claimed that they were indeed in the same place where the car was discovered. He and Lori stopped in the deserted area to talk. They smoked and then felt mutual attraction. They had sex, and after a brief conversation, the suspect simply left and doesn't know what happened to the deceased afterward. Law enforcement officers present at the interrogation were skeptical about this. After all, Lori had never been noticed having such romances before. This was absolutely uncharacteristic of her. Additionally, the significant age difference was troubling 35 years. Everyone who knew Lori claimed that it was unlikely that a mature woman who devoted all her free time to children and grandchildren would begin a relationship with such a young man. She simply didn't have the time or interest for this. Also, a few years ago, she had been in a toxic relationship from which she had difficulty escaping. After this, the woman put an end to her personal life and made a vow never to date anyone again. Investigators were convinced that Diego Hernandez was involved in this crime, so they continued the investigation, accumulating more and more evidence. Sensing danger, Hernandez again changed his testimony, claiming that he had been in a relationship with the murdered woman for over a year, but they kept it secret. However, careful examination of their phones showed this was untrue. They never communicated, called, or exchanged messages. There was no call history or text messages between them, which would have been impossible in the case of a serious long-term romance. It seemed they weren't even acquainted before that fatal night. And if they were acquainted and had been dating for a whole year, why didn't Lori introduce him to friends or her family? And why did she check the young man's identification documents if she knew him? All of this didn't align with his story, and it sounded absolutely implausible. On October 8, 2019, Diego Hernandez was arrested on charges of first-degree murder and taken into custody. This was a real shock for all local residents who knew the accused as a calm and polite person. He had never previously shown cruelty, aggression, or propensity for violence, was quiet and modest, but all facts pointed only to him. The prosecution insisted that this was a brutal murder. Diego asked kind-hearted, accommodating Lori to give him a ride, and she agreed. The woman was too trusting, always saw only good in people, and didn't even suspect the young man's dark intentions toward her. During the ride, Diego began harassing Lori, but she refused him, after which he attacked, beat the woman in a deserted place, raped and strangled her. All of this was confirmed by characteristic traces on the deceased's body. They found traces of his DNA in the car, which were later also found under the victim's fingernails. Lori resisted and fought for her life until the last moment, and it was she who inflicted defensive scratches on his face. The trial of 24-year-old Hernandez began in March 2021. It took a lot of time to reconstruct the entire sequence of events in detail. Diego never admitted his guilt, despite irrefutable evidence, and insisted on his innocence. The defendant continued to claim that he and the deceased were in a romantic relationship, but no one believed this. This was denied by her children, friends, and colleagues who were familiar with her personal life. The prosecutor stated that Diego Hernandez was a real predator who couldn't resist an attractive woman, and taking advantage of her kindness and convenient situation, attacked her due to his perverted fantasies. The jury deliberated the case materials for about 2 hours, after which they unanimously concluded that Hernandez was guilty of first-degree murder, since all signs of premeditation were found in the case. At the sentencing stage in the courtroom, Diego Hernandez made an unexpected statement, fully admitting his guilt. As a result, he received life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than 35 years from the beginning of serving his term. The bloody killer still remains in Montana State Prison. The cruel story of Lori Bray is not just one person's tragedy. It's a mirror that each of us should look into. This isn't a story about bad people existing in the world. This is a story about how evil knows how to wear a mask of normalcy. About how the most dangerous thing is when we start living on autopilot, when it seems that this won't happen to me, when we trust blindly, ignore warning bells, forget about basic caution. We all want to see good in people, but the truth is that evil in our world isn't decreasing. It's just becoming smarter, more silent, quieter. Now it doesn't come at you with a knife in an alley. Now it smiles, asks how you're doing, and quietly follows you at night when you think you're already safe. We can't know who will be the next target, but we can reduce the risks. First of all, it's attentiveness to people around us, to circumstances, to details. A suspicious look, an incomprehensible call, a car that's been standing in the same place for several days in a row, an unfamiliar face near the house. This isn't paranoia. This is basic safety hygiene. We wash our hands to avoid catching a virus. We should react the same way to things that don't fit the norm. This doesn't mean living in fear, it means being present in reality. The second point is communication. If you live alone, establish a habit of regularly informing someone where you are, when you're leaving, when you're returning. Sounds banal? But often this banality saves lives. If something happens to you, it's important that it's noticed immediately. As in this story, the fact that Lori didn't call her son became the first alarming signal. And what if she hadn't had such contact with loved ones? What if the son hadn't known that his mother always called? Everything would have dragged on even longer. And third, technology. We live in a time when everyone has a smartphone, but many still don't use it for personal safety. There are apps that track your location, allow you to send an SOS signal in case of danger. Surveillance cameras, recorders, GPS trackers, all of this is available and cheap today. The question isn't about money. The question is whether we take danger seriously before something happens. One more important thing. Don't think that bad things only happen in nightclubs, big cities, or to those who are to blame themselves. Lori lived in a town of 7,000 people, among open fields and familiar faces, and it was there that a person was found who calmly planned, watched, waited for the moment. Statistics show that most attacks, disappearances, and even murders aren't the work of random maniacs, but of people the victim knew, trusted. Lori's story confirms this. The one who destroyed her life watched her, knew her schedule, knew when she was alone. Therefore, the main rule: don't ignore intuition. It often speaks quietly, but accurately. If you feel uncomfortable, trust this. If something alarms you, step away, refuse, call, ask for help. Don't be afraid to seem strange, hysterical, paranoid. This is better than staying silent and then not having time to change anything. And also take care of each other. Never underestimate the power of a simple, "How are you?" message, or "Are you home yet?" call. It's exactly this small thing that sometimes saves lives. Let Lori's story be a painful but valuable reminder. No one is immune, but everyone can do something to reduce the risk. And if at least one person after this becomes a little more attentive, careful, values themselves and life a little more, then this story wasn't in vain.